Okay, here's the Prime Minister now, and again, that confidence motion Vashi was talking about happening later this afternoon.
I want to recognize the great work that all of Team Canada has done ahead of today's United Nations Security Council vote. We're running for the Security Council seat because we saw a unique opportunity to engage with our partners across the UN to build sustainable peace and to make real progress on the issues that matter. Around the world, people want many of the same things: clean air, a real shot at success, a fair economy, and a just society. And to make that happen, we have to work together, today and every day. That is something that our government is ready to do. At the beginning of the year, I don't think anyone could have predicted what the coming months would hold. COVID-19 is truly an unprecedented challenge. And right from the start, it was clear that we needed to put everything we had on the table in response. So that's exactly what our government did. In the space of a few weeks, we introduced the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We created loans for small businesses and put in place support for specific sectors that have been hardest hit. We rolled out help for seniors, for students, for families. At every step of the way, we kept Canadians up to date about what we were doing to respond. Taken together, we've now introduced the largest economic measures in our lifetimes, measures that are helping millions of people, because that's what the situation demanded. Now, as we begin to safely and gradually restart, I know people are wondering what this pandemic will mean for their jobs in the long run and what the impact has been on our economy and on our path forward. We hear that, and we want to make sure that you have the best information possible. So today, I can announce that in the House of Commons on July 8th, our government will be releasing an economic and fiscal snapshot. This will give Canadians a picture of where our economy is right now, how our response compares to that of other countries, and what we can expect for the months to come. Later today, Minister Morneau will formally announce in Parliament that we will be presenting this economic and fiscal snapshot.
From the beginning of this crisis, we knew that COVID-19 represented an unprecedented challenge for our country. So our response had to reflect that. In just a few weeks, our government introduced a whole series of measures to help people get through this difficult time. We introduced the Emergency Response Benefit and the Emergency Wage Subsidy. We provided loans to small businesses and gave targeted support to sectors that had been hardest hit by the crisis. Whether you're a student or retired, with or without a job, we wanted to be there for you. As we now start to reopen the economy, a lot of people are wondering what to expect in the coming months and what this crisis will mean for our economy. That's why today we are announcing that our government will publish a snapshot of our economic and fiscal situation on July 8th in the House of Commons. That will give us an idea of the state of the economy and how our response compares to that of other countries and what we can expect in future. Later today, Minister Morneau will be informing Parliament that that will occur. Adopting measures to mitigate the consequences of the crisis on our economy is only part of the challenge. We are also working very hard to ensure that hospitals and frontline workers have the equipment and all the material that they require. And on that note, I have some good news to share with you. First, our government has signed an agreement with the Montreal company Galanas to produce silica microbeads that are essential for testing. And this week, Health Canada also certified ventilators produced by two Canadian groups, CAE and the Consortium Ventilators for Canadians. They now will be able to ramp up their production to produce the 20,000 ventilators that have been ordered. 2 years ago, I was at CAE to announce an investment in worker training. Today, we're seeing why it is so important to support not only talent, but innovation here at home.
Researchers across the country make incredible discoveries every day, from rapid advances in understanding COVID-19 over the last few months to years-long studies of climate change and cancer treatments. It's in everyone's interest that they continue doing their vital work. So today, we're announcing almost $500 million in funding through NSERC's additional annual Discovery Grants program. This money will support thousands of Canadian researchers and their groundbreaking work, whether they're studying viruses, developing AI, or making strides in chemical engineering. Canadians are innovative and creative, and that's something we'll always support. This morning, I want to speak about help for another group of Canadians who do vital work, our fish and seafood producers. The women and men who work on fishing boats and in processing plants keep our families fed. But they've been facing some really tough times lately. That's why, in the next week, we're opening applications for 2 additional programs to support the sector. As of today, the Canadian Fish and Seafood Opportunities Fund is available to help producers access new markets, reach new customers, and maintain a foothold internationally. Canada's seafood is among the best in the world, and this fund will help spread the word. On Monday, processors will also be able to apply for help through the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund we created this spring. The fund will provide support for everything from buying PPE to keeping workers safe to purchasing freezers so products stay good while producers find buyers.
Today, we are announcing the reopening of the Canadian Fish and Seafood Opportunities Fund. This program will help seafood producers to access new markets, serve new clients, and retain their presence on international markets. And Monday, processors will also be able to apply for funding under the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund that we created earlier this spring. This is support that they can use for many things, including buying individual protective equipment, protecting their employees, or buying freezers in order to preserve their products if it takes longer than usual to find buyers.
I want to end today with an update on Parks Canada. For a lot of people, no summer is complete without getting the tent packed, the kids in the car, and the time off to go camping. Now, because of the pandemic, many campgrounds had to close temporarily. But the good news is that as of Monday, Parks Canada will gradually start reopening some of their camping sites. No matter what you're planning this summer, whether it's camping or barbecues, keep following public health recommendations and keep doing your part to protect the people around you. Together, we will get through this. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now go to the phones for questions. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Marie Vastel, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the extension of the CERB that you announced yesterday. A number of people, including François Legault and Chambers of Commerce, are concerned that this will just maintain the disincentive to work. And perhaps you should consider allowing people keep more of their work income. Now, at the time you said this was an emergency and you had to help people right away, and that's why you said it would not be changed. But now, 3 months later, don't you think you should take the time to adjust the CERB? Well, there are currently some 3 million Canadians who would like a job, who lost their job, and who are not finding any employment. Yes, we know that the economy is gradually reopening and that some jobs are being created. But the fact remains that there are still far too many people out there who are looking for a job without those jobs being available. So we have to be there to help those people who need support, who need the CERB in order to pay for groceries or support their families. Yes, we are encouraging people and bringing in measures to encourage people to take any jobs that become available, but we're we're very far from being in a situation where there are enough jobs for everyone who wants to work. And that's why we are extending the CERB for an additional 8 weeks.
Suivi, Marie?
Follow up? Yes, I understand. That's something you've repeated a number of times over the last few days. But I want to ask the question, why would it be impossible to change the CERB? I know that there are people who still can't find work, but the question is not to not extend it, but perhaps to change it, to adapt it. And your Minister Qualtrough said that you intend to impose sanctions on fraudsters. So how do you intend to do that, since the bill did not go through? Well, I think it's important that people understand that in a crisis such as this one, we had to get the money out the door as quickly as possible, with as few checks as possible, with respect to people's individual circumstances, because those people needed the money quickly. And as we've said right from the very beginning, we want to ensure that the people who receive the CERB are not trying to defraud the system. Now, we understand and we saw that there are hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have already repaid some payments under the CERB that they should not have received. So the system is working. But unfortunately, there is a small number of criminals and fraudsters who have taken advantage of that system in order to collect that money, while others are supporting each other, and there will be consequences for those individuals.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Last week, you were still saying that the situation in Canada was still too uncertain to provide an economic update. Now you're saying the reverse today. So what changed? Well, an economic update would in fact be unrealistic. An economic update includes projections of exactly what might happen in the coming months and years over a 3 to 5 year horizon. Obviously, we are not in a position to present that. But every 2 weeks, the Finance Department has been sharing all available information on the measures we've introduced, and we are certainly capable of bringing together that data and that information on what we're doing, with a couple of projections as to what could happen in the next few months. So that's why we are going to continue to be transparent and open, present a snapshot of the economy in a few weeks, so that people can see what the state of the economy is now and what could happen in the coming week.
I've consistently said that an economic and fiscal update would be unrealistic right now, because it automatically includes projections for a year, 3 years, 5 years ahead of time, which, quite frankly, we simply couldn't make any responsible predictions about. However, every 2 weeks over the past number of months, we have put forward all the information from Finance to the Finance Committee, to parliamentarians, on the measures that we have moved forward on, to give a very precise accounting on what we've done. We've continued to do that, and in a few weeks we will gather all that together, along with a sense of where we are, comparisons to where we are compared to other countries, and some estimates on where we could be in the coming months. But this will not be an economic and fiscal update. It will be more of a snapshot or a portrait of where we are right now.
Suivi, Melanie?
Follow up? Yes, so as I understand it, you're not going beyond a horizon of several months. So until when will we have an idea of the state of the economy? Well, the Minister of Finance is currently working on this. Obviously, we want to provide as much information as possible to people, but we also want that information to be helpful. So the Minister of Finance will be able to specify what that will include a little later.
Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Theresa Wright, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Yes, good morning, Prime Minister. Just following up on what you just said in terms of the fact that you've said that uncertainty makes it impossible to provide a meaningful fiscal update. Given that, what is the value of this fiscal snapshot that's coming in July, given all that uncertainty that we face?
I think it'll be useful for people to see the scale and the details on everything that we have put out. As I've said, we've been keeping the Finance Committee and through them parliamentarians updated every 2 weeks on all the measures we've been flowing out, but at the same time pulling them all together in a look over the past few months on all the measures we've done, comparing the measures we've done in Canada to countries around the world. Some may have done better, some won't have done nearly as much. So we get a sense of where we are compared to others and a sense of what the coming weeks or months could look like. These are things that I think are useful for people to come together on. But because of the transparency we've demonstrated every step of the time, it is a consistent part of what we're continuing to do.
Follow-up, Teresa?
Yes, on another issue, it often takes years for the RCMP to respond to formal recommendations from the Force's civilian watchdog. Is this acceptable to you?
I think one of the things that we've seen come to light over the past weeks and months is that our systems are not adequate to respond to the concerns that racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians and others who want to see a reduction of systemic discrimination in our institutions move forward quicker. So we are going to move much quicker on responding to these things, on making changes to our institutions to really go after systemic discrimination. Okay. Je pense que ce qu'on voit depuis des
I think that what we've been seeing for several weeks now is the speed at which our institutions are responding to complaints and to the need to change, and that change is too slow. It must be expedited.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Greg Quinn, Market News. Line open.
Hello. Governments in the past have used omnibus bills to put a lot of side legislation into budget packages. When you do present a full budget, will you commit to refraining from using an omnibus bill to put in other measures?
We have been consistent in our approach over the past years of not moving forward with omnibus legislation. These are things that we are fairly strict on. It's something that we saw previous Conservative governments significantly abuse, which is why we made commitments to not have omnibus legislation, and we're going to be sticking with that. Nous avions vu dans le passé des gouvernements conservateurs abuser des omnibus qui avaient énormément de mesures qui n'étaient pas liées aux objectifs
that were not connected to the specific goals of the bill or the budget. And that's why we have limited the number of measures within this legislation so that we can have a better debate in Parliament, and we will continue to take that approach.
Yes. The unemployment rate is at a record high, and clearly the CERB program shows millions of people in Canada had savings that weren't enough to last even a couple of months through a time like this. Given the rise in gig employment and tech companies, do we have to take another look at social programs or regulation or taxation of these kinds of gig employers when we get through this tough moment?
I think absolutely, Greg. That's something that we need to look at. We've seen this crisis expose real vulnerabilities within our communities, within our employment systems. We are responding to this emergency right now, but we are also reflecting very carefully on how we can build back better, build back fairer, build back greener, make changes to our systems so that going forward, whether there's another pandemic or some other crises or not, that people are better supported by our systems. We need to make sure that we're doing right by Canadians, and this crisis has given us not just examples of where we haven't been good enough in the past as governments, but opportunities to make significant changes. Je pense absolument que nous devons
I
regarder
absolutely
tous nos
believe
systèmes
that
pour
we
voir
have
si on peut
to
les améliorer.
look at all our systems to see if we can improve them. This pandemic has exposed flaws in our system in terms of its treatment of the most vulnerable, and I think this gives us an opportunity to make changes for the better and rebuild our country and systems that will be fairer and more generous towards the most vulnerable. So this is a great opportunity for everyone. If there are other pandemics, or if we go back to normal, whatever the situation, we need to do more for vulnerable Canadians.
Our global news. You've said July 8th it will be a fiscal snapshot. I'm wondering what specifically it will include, what sorts of numbers, and if this is a means to appease the opposition who've been asking for a fiscal update.
Over the past number of months, we have put forward in full transparency updated numbers every 2 weeks to the Finance Committee on measures that we've put forward. So our commitment to transparency has been ongoing, as has been the case for this government since the very beginning. At the same time, it will be useful to pull together all these different measures so people understand the scale of what this country has done, some comparators with other countries so that they can see where we fit on the spectrum of help to citizens in our peer countries, but also a sense of what could be expected in the coming months. I think it would be a little bit unrealistic to project much further than a few months because things are changing so rapidly, but we're happy to continue to demonstrate the kind of transparency and accountability that Canadians expect and deserve. Je pense que ça va être intéressant de pouvoir rassembler toutes les informations qu'on partage à tous les 2 semaines avec le comité des finances.
All the information at the Finance Department with respect to our investments and the resources we're providing to Canadians. But at the same time, it will be a chance to compare ourselves to other countries to see where we are with respect to our support for Canadians. And it will also give people an idea of what the next weeks or months could hold without necessarily providing long-term predictions. And we continue to focus on transparency.
On a slightly different topic. Earlier today, the Bloc Québécois leader said that you were governing like a king, that you have no respect for Parliament and you are doing nothing for Quebec. I'd just like to get your response to that.
As we know, this is a minority parliament, so decisions about whether Parliament sits and how we move forward need to be made on a consensus or on a majority basis in the Parliament, which is why a number of weeks ago we worked with other parties and got an agreement to continue to focus on the COVID-19 crisis, but expand the rules so people could be asking questions on any topics and ensure that we have accountability moments and times for the Parliament to return throughout the summer, including on July 8th, where we'll be presenting a fiscal update. So, 3 different parties came together to make a determination of what Parliament would do. That's how Parliament functions. I can understand that both the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives did not want this particular outcome, but the will of Parliament was expressed by a majority, by the 3 parties who came together to determine what we're doing. That's how Parliament works. And if every time something doesn't go their way, an opposition party cries, "Oh no, it's a dictatorship!" all of a sudden, it's sort of irresponsible, and it undermines, I think, the strength of our democracy that we've been able to show through this crisis, the strength of our institutions that continue to do really important work, not just to help Canadians during this crisis, but to remain accountable and engaged in our democratic processes.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Je pense que c'est
I think it's extremely important to point out that the current situation in Parliament was debated and voted on by the majority of parliamentarians. There are 3 parties that came together to determine that, yes, we were going to have a COVID-19 committee, broadened question period, so that more parliamentarians could ask questions on any issue and come back 4 times during the summer, including in July for this economic snapshot. And I think that's the way a parliament is supposed to work. A minority parliament, in that type of minority parliament, no party alone can decide how things will work. We need to collaborate, and the fact is that a majority of members of parliament agreed with that approach. Unfortunately, the Bloc Québécois and the Conservatives were not happy with that conclusion. They didn't like the majority decision of Parliament. But if every single time that someone doesn't get what they want in a minority Parliament, they start to say, well, this is nothing but a dictatorship, well, I think that's a bit ridiculous, first of all. And second of all, it undermines people's confidence, the confidence people should have in our institutions that are serving Canadians very, very well. Now, we brought in 4 bills in the last few months to help Canadians, and we have also shown just how well our democracy and our institutions are continuing to operate. That should reassure Canadians that even in a crisis, we're working very well as a democracy. Radio-Canada, with respect to the seat on the UN Security Council, you have invested a great deal personally in this, a lot of political capital. You've said Canada is back. What happens if we lose? What if you don't get that permanent seat? Do you believe it will be your fault personally? Well, for the last 5 years, Canada has been much more deeply engaged in the world, whether it's through our initiatives in Paris on climate change, whether it's in the G7, or whether it's in protecting our oceans and addressing sexual equality in the world. In our work in many multilateral institutions has shown that Canada continues to be deeply engaged in developing priorities for ourselves and for developing countries, particularly developing countries that need more funding and better institutions in a situation such as this. So Canada is working very well within the multilateral system and has been for the last 5 years. The seat on the UN Security Council is an additional means of ensuring that our voice will be heard. Our actions will continue, whatever the result in the coming days. We know that an engaged Canada is good for the rest of the world, but it's also good for Canadians. It's in our own interest to have stable and predictable rules around the world. It's in our own interest to have support out there for vulnerable people through education and economic progress for people around the world, because Canada succeeds when everyone else in the world succeeds. That's what we've been doing for 5 years, and that's what we will continue to do, whether we're on the Security Council or not. If we are there, it will be easier to have our voice heard, but our engaged approach will not change.
I think one of the things we've seen over the past 5 years is Canada has stepped up on the world stage, whether it's been on the fight against climate change through our oceans and through support for small island developing states, as well as climate financing internationally, whether it's been on women, peace and security with our impacts on the new Vancouver Principles on peacekeeping, whether it's moving forward on financing for development with developing countries, looking at our international financial institutions, the Bretton Woods structures that have lasted and kept us so well for 75 years, but need to be modified. Canada has continued to be a strong voice on the world stage because this is what Canada does well, and we will continue to do it. Yes, a seat on the UN Security Council will be an additional lever and an extra way that Canada can make sure that our voice and our values are being heard at the highest levels. But we will continue to make a difference in the world and defend multilateralism, not just because it's good for the world, but because it's good for Canadians. Canadians do well when we are connected to the world, when we are trading with the world, when there are clear rules in place for things like international trade and international behaviors. We do well when countries come together to work collaboratively and respectfully on solving big problems. We do well when vulnerable people around around the world have better opportunities to succeed and fewer conflicts and fewer social inequities. These are the things that Canada has been doing for the past 5 years. These are the things that we will continue to do into the future, regardless of what happens this week. But it certainly would be nice to be able to have that extra lever of a seat on the Security Council.
Je suis plus sûr de comprendre. Là. Je vous demandais, est-ce qu'il y a une partie qui va être de votre faute personnelle là-dedans?
I was asking you whether part of it would be your own fault if you don't get a seat. Now, on the long-term care facilities, the soldiers have been there, there have been problems there. Is there an agreement with Quebec now? How many volunteers from the Canadian Red Cross will be going in there? Can you clearly explain what's happening? Because it's important to know what's occurring in these homes. Well, I can tell you that we have been continuing our very productive discussions with Quebec. There's always a lot of great collaboration between the federal government and Quebec, and we'll have announcements to make on that very soon.
This fiscal snapshot that you're going to be releasing, if you're doing this, does this mean that the big spending announcements have now all been made? And if not, I mean, how reliable will this be? Also, when do you think you're going to be in a position to actually put forward a fiscal update or a budget?
I think, first of all, we know that we are moving through the emergency phase right now into something that is more of a recovery phase. We will continue to monitor what is needed in the economy as we go forward on extending certain programs, on modifying others. But as we've been doing from the beginning, we will keep adjusting as we go. I think it is useful to bundle together all the initiatives and all the ways we've helped Canadians over the past months in one concrete snapshot in a few weeks. But of course, we recognize that if there is a second wave, if Canadians fall on hard times because of COVID-19 in the coming months, we will need to do more. We are going to remain focused on making sure that Canadians are able to get through this in the best possible way, to be able to keep ourselves and our families safe, but also to be able to make sure we have a strong economy going forward. So yes, now is a natural time for bundling together everything that we've done with this fiscal snapshot. But certainly as we move forward, we will continue to be transparent about decisions big and small we have to take to continue to keep Canadians safe. As for when there would be a full fiscal update or an eventual budget, right now we're still very much responding to an immediate situation, and we will continue to reflect on when that time could be right as the situation stabilizes. Je pense que évidemment, on est en train de passer.
We are moving now from the emergency to a reopening economy, so it's perfectly logical that we should provide information about all the measures we brought in over the last few months. Now, that does not mean that there will not be other initiatives introduced if there's a second wave or if we need to extend certain programs. But it is logical to share a picture of where we are now in Canada with Canadians. With respect to the next steps, a budget or a more formal economic update, we continue to look at the situation, and when the economy is stable enough to do that, we will.
And you were asked this a little earlier. I'd like to give you another opportunity to answer. How much do you have personally riding on this UN Security Council vote?
I think this is something that Canadians expect for us to be involved in the world, and I've certainly seen the impact that Canada can have on the world stage through the G7, through the G20, through our leadership in multilateral fora at a time where there are large countries sort of withdrawing a little bit from the global stage. I believe deeply that Canada can and should be stepping up on the world stage, and I've demonstrated that Canadians can and do have a large impact on the world when we do that over the past 5 years. I certainly look forward to being able to continue that, and do see that the UN Security Council seat could be a very powerful tool for continuing what we're doing. But as I've said from the beginning, a seat on the UN Security Council is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. It's a means to continue ensuring that our values, that our voice, and that our solutions are heard and resonating at all levels of multilateralism.
As I've noted many times, a seat on the UN Security Council is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end, a way of ensuring that Canadian values and solutions can continue to resonate on the world stage. I think people have seen just what kind of positive impact Canada has had on the world in the last 5 years, and I hope to continue that with a seat on the Security Council. However, whatever the result of the vote is, we will continue to be there and to be engaged with the rest of the world, because it's good for Canadians to have a more stable world where people follow the rules.
CTV News. Prime Minister, you've listed many things Canada has done internationally on the world stage, but we know that for members, UN members that are voting today on the Security Council seat, two key factors are commitments to peacekeeping and amount of percentage of GDP dedicated to foreign aid. How do you think Canada has done on those two measures compared to the two countries we're competing against?
I think there's always more to do, and we're always looking at how Canada can better help, how Canada can best help on the world stage. But right now, what we're seeing in the world is challenges to the multilateral system, with large countries withdrawing a little bit their support for positive engagement on the world stage. It is time for medium-sized countries who can have a big voice to step up, and that's why Canada's voice on the UN Security Council could be a strong lever for continuing the defense of the multilateral system we're in and improvements to that multilateral system. I have nothing but respect for our two competitors, Ireland and Norway, that have demonstrated an engagement in the world. There's no question about it, and it is unfortunate that we're in a situation of having to compete against friends for this. But I know that Canada has a particular ability to convene voices from around the world, to move forward in ways that are connected to every country around the world through our diaspora, a voice that is consistent and strong in its values, and is really necessary on the world stage right now. We need to have strong voices that are there to speak for others, not just for themselves, and Canada has consistently done that, and that's why I am optimistic about the process we're in. Je pense que c'est important de souligner à quel point le Canada amène quelque chose de particulier avec
has a special contribution to make with its diversity, its international engagement. We are large enough as a country to make a difference, but small enough to know that we cannot do everything alone. And that is our strength and has been for many years. Now, certainly Ireland and Norway are allied countries, and they have had a very positive impact on the world. But Canada has a special strength to contribute, which is even greater than those two countries through our membership in the G7, the G20, the Francophonie, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, etc., and OPEC. We have been present at so many different tables that we are able to bring people together to ensure that a positive voice can be heard, a voice that often is not heard, because sometimes the large countries are more worried about themselves than others.
A hub city for the NHL's return to play, provided they can get agreement from local authorities. But the 14-day quarantine for people crossing the Canada-U.S. border is still a rate-limiting step towards that, and it's the same rule that's kept people from being able to go to family weddings, funerals even. What are you proposing? What are you considering with respect to hockey players? Are you going to consider making them essential workers, or are you going to create some other kind of waiver for them that would allow them to enter the country without the 14-day quarantine?
We will be making announcements around this at the appropriate time, but we're working with local health authorities, provincial health authorities, and the NHL to make sure that regardless of the measures in place, Canadians are kept safe, and our focus is on community safety throughout. There are ways that we can ensure that the principles are respected in a way that makes sense for the NHL, and those are what the conversations are. But we are, as I said, open to making arrangements as long as the principles of keeping Canadians safe, first and foremost, and preventing the spread of COVID-19 are respected. Je pense que même si nous
I
voulons
think
tous
that
voir,
even if we'd all like to see some hockey played this summer, we have to focus on the principle of protecting Canadians and preventing the spread of COVID-19. That's why we have been working with the NHL and provincial authorities and local authorities on measures that will make it possible for the NHL to play, knowing that at every step of the way, we will not be risking the health of Canadians.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.